Man had feelings before he even attempted to understand them. The human being had emotional pressures, and these emotional pressures gradually came under the control of the mind. But the emotional pressures had never been completely conquered by the mind. The mind has been used principally as means or as skills to the accomplishment of personal emotional ends. The individual used his emotions to get what he wanted. He has used his mind also as a means of skilling the desire to get what he wanted. So the mind developed all kinds of excuses for selfishness, all kinds of explanations for jealousy, hate, anger, suspicion, doubt, worry, fear, anxiety. All of these emotional pressures in themselves have been ordered or rationalized or irrationalized by the mind. The mind is always present to fulfill or justify the pressures of the emotions. If we want something badly enough, we can bring the mind in and find ingenious ways of getting what we want. If by chance the process results in a conspiracy in which we know we must participate in an action that is dishonorable, the mind will justify the dishonor. The mind will explain, perhaps, that everybody lives off of everybody else, so why not start now? The mind also says, what I want, I must have. The emotion tells him what he wants, and the mind tells him how to get it. This partnership is extremely powerful, and is still very largely dominating human conduct. And it will do so as long as basically man's internal life is selfish. As long as he continuously labors to the advancement of his own purposes, arguing himself in and out of the merits and demerits of his own conduct, as long as this process continues, the problems of society cannot be solved. This is very obvious today, for the great world family in which we are a part is in a state of terrible agitation, and behind all of this agitation is self-interest of some kind. The self-interest of the despot to control the people. The self-interest of the people to try to overthrow the despot. And all the way along, the lack of love changes possible arbitrations into open warfare. The profit system is another example of self-centeredness, in which in order to get what we want and as much of it as possible, we are perfectly willing to injure others, cheat them, delude them with false promises, and in any way that can be worked out, use others for our own advancement. This is a complete absence of love. Now, Paul tells us that love suffereth long and is kind. And I don't know of any phrase in the New Testament when I use it in a domestic problem doesn't make more misery. People don't want to hear it. They do not wish to suffer long over anything. And most people are not interested in suffering long over love. They are more inclined to take the position that it isn't the lesson which is important, it's the feelings of the moment. The individual would rather break a marriage than outgrow his own selfishness. And this happens in countless cases. The problems of relationships are challenges which are either met by the person who wants to help and to grow, or else they are rejected by the individual who places his own comfort above every other consideration. So we have a great deal to learn in this particular area. Now we also go on to various other aspects of love. The most intimate form being human relationships. Here we have the love principle in the universe bound tightly to the principle of reproduction and the perpetuation of the species. Here then we have a very grave problem for consideration. That is the inevitable fact that the entire reproductive process is a microcosm of a universal principle. It is a way in which nature accomplishes something. But nature is moved in all of this process of accomplishment by law, love, and consistency. Therefore, human relationships of an intimate nature must always be regarded as symbolical of something, symbolical of a deeper, more important, more powerful fact than the physical relationships themselves. Any human relationship that is based upon physical factors alone will fail. You cannot win on that level. But any emotion, enriched, ennobled, regenerated by inward consciousness, is transformed alchemically into a ritual, into a mass, into a magnificent spiritual experience. On that level, human affections become probably the most powerful force for regeneration that there is. But viewed on a purely physical, selfish gratification of emotional intensity, they are a very disastrous situation. Furthermore, we have to bear in mind that in spite of all our feelings to the contrary, our intimate emotional reactions are not controlled by our emotions primarily, but by the mind. It is the mind that has taken over and is responsible for practically all of the physical pressures of human relationships. Therefore, as Plotinus points out, the idealizing of life is to establish all material things on levels of sacraments. Patriotism is a sacrament, not an allegiance. Family is a sacrament, not guaranteed by the state or sanctified by the church necessarily. It is a sacrament of relationships. Business is a mass instead of being a mass of selfishness. All of these things, properly done, properly used, idealized, become the basis of progress. They make possible the growth of individuals and of societies. But while they remain simply conveniences of credit and profit, all will go badly. There is no other possible way in which we can face these difficulties. Faced with them, we then come to the next question. What do we do about it? The average person is in a bewildered state. He does not really know how to regenerate or redeem his own nature. The pressures of the problems around him are so intense that he does not feel adequate. He has never yet learned to realize that truth and one person equals a majority. He is unable to withstand a very materialistic, conniving peer group to which he belongs. He is unable to resist the corruption of that which is around him and which has refused or rejected or has never known the universal principles of life. So we come now to a definition, a simple approach to the problem of love. Love is something that springs up in human beings. And in most instances, it begins with a very sincere emotion. The average person is not necessarily without a certain degree of true affection in his nature. This true affection, however, is gradually diluted by pressures of circumstance. One answer to this, of course, is the fact that the religious life of society has gradually deteriorated. Not too long ago, every individual, regardless of his personal attitudes and ambitions, was largely guided by the church of his choice. He was told primarily what constituted a moral life. He was given the laws and rules of common decency. He was given the impulse and the strength to a degree to keep the principles he believed. He recharged this in himself by periodic religious experiences. He lived with and shared the problems of people of religious convictions similar to his own. 100 years ago, American society was very largely built upon congregational worship. The individual lived in a community. He selected his church. Perhaps there was only one, perhaps there were several. But in each instance, he was surrounded by people who also held attitudes similar to his own. Now, no one will deny that in this situation there were also shortcomings. The very tight theological point of view became too oppressive for many people. But at the same time, there was a certain strength, a certain common uniting in worship, and the community rose in righteous indignation against any serious compromise of these religious principles. Now, the fact that we live in a different generation does not alter the integrity of the principles, but it must and does alter our approach to them. We are living in a much more liberal time, but liberality is not the privilege of doing what we please. It is a privilege given to us to do what is right. And the liberality of it is that we can all do what is right if we want to, seriously enough. The problem of religion today, then, is its lack of personal centering in the life of the average person. He does not have a regular contact with people of similar spiritual conviction. He does not recharge his spiritual life by more or less continuing contact with spiritual values. So what comes out of this is very simple. It is evidently part of nature that the human being shall not be constantly led. He must finally lead himself. He cannot be continually a child. He must attain maturity. And as he becomes more and more mature, the supports and defenses which held him in a pattern are relaxed. But this is not a proof that he no longer needs the pattern. It means he must take it over and administer it himself. When we start to think about the problem of love, then, we realize that wherever love intensifies a conviction, things are accomplished more easily. The individual who loves nature becomes happy in it. The individual who loves music has a life purpose with that which he has given his affection. The painter who loves beauty has now a standard of life. And if he is left to himself and left to his own inner guidance, he will probably do fairly well. But unfortunately, each of these arts has been so commercialized that the average member of these various professions and crafts feels it inevitable that he must compromise in order to survive. Yet actually, we do not have to make this kind of compromise. It all depends upon the ability of the person to release through himself at least the beginnings of a sincere, unselfish affection. There must be something to which he can bestow his affection without fear. There must also be a strength in himself that if his bestowal has been misjudged or his trust was abused, that he still is not damaged in the essential principle itself. If he happens to love the wrong thing, this is too bad. But that does not mean that love is wrong. It means that it has been unwisely bestowed. The fault still remains with the individual himself. But whatever lesson he learns, no matter how grievous it may be, it should bring him into fuller and closer association with the great laws of nature under which he exists. Religion, therefore, giving us the concept of the love of God, has found various ways to attempt to strengthen this in our own relationships. The most common strengthening force, of course, is religion, and religion's greatest power is faith. Now, faith is belief and veneration for the reality of things unseen. Faith begins with the individual recognizing that there are powers greater than his own. Faith begins with a dependency upon life itself.